Phase 1. The Bilge. Your boots are wet, not from rain, from bilge water 3 inches deep sloshing under the floor plates of a main engine room the size of a warehouse. The second engineer hands you a spanner and says one word: torque. You don't know the sequence yet. 18 bolts, 50 Newton meters each, cross pattern. Get it wrong, and a cylinder head gasket blows at sea 400 miles from the nearest port. You're an engine cadet, somewhere between $500 and $3,000 a month depending on the company. Some cadetships don't pay at all. You paid for your own berth just to stand here. The noise is a wall, 110 decibels, sustained. You wear the plugs, you still feel it in your teeth. Above you, a chief engineer you've spoken to twice walks by without looking down. You came here because a recruiter's pamphlet showed a photo of sunset over open water. Nobody showed you this: a training record book, half filled, and a bilge that needs pumping before your watch ends. The ship doesn't wait for you to understand it. It just keeps running, and you're already behind. Phase 2. The watch. 4 hours on, 8 hours off. That rhythm replaces your body clock before you notice it happening. You've passed your basic safety training. You've logged your sea time. Now you stand independent watches as a fourth engineer. Salaries somewhere around $1,600 to $3,000 a month. And for the first time, machinery alarms are your responsibility, not someone else's. Purifiers, compressors, the bunker fuel system. You learn the smell of a bearing about to seize before the gauge confirms it. That's not in any manual. That's repetition, teaching your senses something your brain hasn't caught up to yet. Your contract runs 4 to 6 months. No weekends off, just watches, meals, sleep, repeat. Inside a steel box moving across an ocean you never actually see because portholes in the engine room don't exist. You call home on a satellite connection that costs the company money and clips every third word. Your partner tells you about a birthday party. You are 3 time zones away, standing next to a generator listening for a knock in the piston that never came. You don't mention that part. It wouldn't translate. Phase 3, the exam. 18 months of sea time, logged and stamped. Now, the exam. Second Engineer Certificate of Competency Class 1, oral and written, administered by your flag state's maritime authority. You study fuel injection timing curves in a cabin that smells like diesel no matter how many times you shower. Pass, and you're promoted to third engineer, handling auxiliary boilers and the auxiliary engine room, pay climbing toward $4,000 to $6,000 a month. This is the part nobody photographs for the recruitment pamphlet. A man in his 30s alone in a mess room repeating pump sequences out loud to nobody. You used to study with people. Now you study against the deadline that determines whether you go home in 4 months or extend the contract because a relief engineer never showed up in Singapore. You pass, there's no ceremony. Just a new stripe on the shoulder board and a slightly heavier folder of duties. Somewhere in the last 18 months, you stopped calling it the job. You started calling it the ship. Small shift in language. Nobody notices language shifting. That's exactly why it works. Phase 4, the deputy. Second engineer now, $7,000 to $10,000 a month. You manage the main engine, the technical purchasing, the maintenance planning, and you report directly to a chief engineer who reports directly to nobody but the company and international maritime law. You are, for the first time, the person other engineers come to when something breaks at 3 in the morning. A ballast pump seizes off the coast of Sri Lanka. You're the one on the radio to the shore-based technical superintendent, translating a mechanical failure into a cost estimate he can approve from an office in Hamburg or Manila. You've become fluent in 2 languages now: diesel mechanics and corporate liability. Your old university friends post photos of weddings, promotions, apartments. You like the photos from an internet connection that costs 11 cents a megabyte. You tell yourself you'll catch up when you're shore-based. You don't yet know that "when I'm shore-based" is a sentence senior engineers have been saying for 20 years. It isn't a plan. It's a placeholder. You just haven't learned the difference yet. Phase 5, the command. The chief engineer, the stripe you've been working towards since the bilge water and the 18 bolts. Statutory responsibility for every mechanical and electrical system under Solus Chapter 2-1, the international law that makes you legally the person accountable if the engine room fails. $9,000 to $15,000 a month on a container ship. On an LNG carrier, past $20,000. You manage 8 to 12 crew from 4 or 5 nationalities, none of whom share a first language with you, all of whom need clear instruction anyway. You've learned to give orders in simplified maritime English, stripped of idiom, because idiom kills people in an emergency. You sign for parts worth more than your first car. You are, on paper, successful beyond what the cadet in the Bilgewater could have imagined, but something has quietly reorganized inside you. You no longer think in days, you think in contracts. 4 months on, 2 months off. The rhythm that once felt temporary now feels like the only rhythm you know how to live in. Phase 6, the leave. You're home. 60 days, maybe 90. Paid, waiting for you like a debt the company owes and settles precisely. Your children have grown in increments you missed. A tooth, a height mark on a doorframe, a new best friend whose name you're hearing for the first time. Your partner has built a life with a shape you're not quite inside of. You try to help with the school run and discover you don't know which classroom, which teacher, which snack is allowed. Small failures. Nobody blames you out loud. You notice, though, that you feel more at ease reading a manual for a new engine model than you do at a parent-teacher conference. That unease doesn't announce itself. It just sits there, quietly, while you unpack a suitcase that still smells faintly of fuel oil no matter how many times it's washed. 60 days pass faster than 4 hours on watch used to. Then the agency calls. Next assignment. A different ship, a different crew. You say yes because saying yes is the only motion you fully trust anymore. Phase 7, the system. You've stopped thinking of yourself as someone who works on ships. You are now a component inside a global shipping network that moves 80% of world trade by tonnage, and you understand your place in it with total clarity. You know which classification society, DNV or Lloyd's or Bureau Veritas, will audit your engine log next. You know your chief engineer certificate needs revalidation every 5 years, another exam, another fee, another piece of paper that decides whether you're allowed to keep doing the only thing you now know how to do. Your pension, if the company offers one, is tied to a flag state you've never visited, administering a ship registered in a country whose language you don't speak. You used to imagine a house with a workshop. Now you imagine a shore-based role, marine superintendent maybe, $70,000 to $90,000 a year, a fraction of what you earn now, but stable. 4 minutes from your own bed every single night. The math doesn't work yet. You keep doing it anyway on quiet nights, like counting something you're not ready to spend. Phase 8, the superintendent. You take the shore job, technical superintendent, overseeing 4 vessels from an office with a window that doesn't move, doesn't vibrate, doesn't smell of diesel. The pay drops somewhere near $80,000 a year, less than half what the LNG contract paid. Your commute is 9 minutes. Your children stop being surprised when you're at dinner. But you notice something in the first quiet month. You miss the alarm panel. You miss knowing, by sound alone, what a machine needs before it fails. Here, failure arrives as an email, a report, a budget line item, filtered through 3 layers of people who've never stood in an engine room at 4 in the morning. You built 20 years of instinct for a job that no longer asks you to use it. You catch yourself some evenings describing a bearing fault to your spouse in more detail than she asked for, because it's the one language you're still fluent in, and you're not sure who else speaks it anymore. Phase 9, the reunion. A former cadet from your first ship messages you. He's a second engineer now, on a route you used to sail, complaining about the same bilge pump model you complained about 20 years earlier. You write back with advice before you've thought about it. Torque sequence, cross pattern, 50 Newton meters, and you realize the number never left you. You ask him how leave is treating him. He says his son doesn't really know him yet. You start typing a reply about how that gets easier. You stop. It didn't get easier for you. It got quieter. You learn to live around the gap instead of closing it. and you called that peace for years because the alternative was admitting the gap was permanent. You don't send that part. You send something encouraging instead, because that's what was sent to you once in a mess room by a chief engineer who also never mentioned the gap. Phase 10. The bolts. You're 61, retired from sea, 2 years out of the superintendent role too. Your grandson is in the garage, holding a socket wrench, asking what torque means. You crouch down. Same joints that stood on wet floor plates for 3 decades protest a little now. You take the wrench and show him the cross pattern. One bolt, then its opposite, then the next, then its opposite, spreading the load evenly so nothing warps under pressure. 50 Newton meters, more or less, for a bolt this size. He asks where you learned that. You tell him, a ship, a long time ago, before he was born, before his mother was born. He doesn't ask what it cost you. Grandsons rarely do. You don't tell him about the tooth you missed, the classroom you couldn't find, the gap you called peace. You just watch his hands find the rhythm, the way yours once did, in a room that smelled nothing like diesel. He tightens the last bolt, asks if he got it right. You don't answer right away. The cycle continues.